Roger Maynard has produced a water vapor injection system which is very useful. 50 years ago, car engines were not nearly as powerful as they are now. In those days, it was quite common for a driver to remark that his car ran smoother and more powerfully on wet days. This was not imagination, as water vapor drawn into the engine along with the air turned to steam at the moment of ignition, and expanding provided additional thrust to the pistons while lowering the running temperature of the engine very slightly. This fact was used in World War II, when units which were effectively standard bubblers used with HHO boosters were added to vehicles. Roger Maynard has built and used these units extensively since 1978, and my thanks goes to him for providing this information and illustrations. This is an actual device here. It's a mason jar filled with water, and it bubbles the incoming air to the engine through a small plastic tube, or perhaps I should more correctly say it passes some of the incoming air at the engine through it. The unit is attached to the air intake of the vehicle between the air filter and the engine. A small diameter plastic pipe is led from there to a glass or plastic container holding water. In the above picture, Roger is using a glass mason jar with a screw-on metal lid which has a seal. Sometimes called a preserving jar, these jars are very convenient. The air feed into the jar is by a length of the same plastic piping and terminated with a standard air stone, or soapstone as it's sometimes called, as used in a home aquarium, as this causes a large number of separate small bubbles from the air passing through it. It is good practice to glue the plastic fittings to the lid of the jar, but this can make the jar too airtight, and if that happens, it may be necessary to remove the rubber seal which is around the neck of the jar. There are many systems which produce cheaper fuel for internal combustion engines by adding water to petrol or other fuels. The system shown here is one of the easiest ways of achieving that result without having to do anything difficult. While it may seem strange that adding cold water droplets to the air which has been drawn into an engine, remember that it is this technique which allows very low efficiency engine of a standard standby generator to operate running on an HHO gas mix, which was generated by its own electrical output. The HHO gas mix is ignited by the spark plug firing, and that generates a high temperature inside the cylinder. That high temperature causes the water droplets, which have a very high surface area for their weight, to turn instantly into what's called flash steam, which has a much higher volume than the water droplets, and that raises the pressure inside the cylinder to such an extent that the HHO gas mix is quite adequate to operate as the fuel source, and so the generator appears to be running with water as the only fuel. It's a very effective system. You have the air being drawn as normal into the actual driving engine or motor of the generator. You have an electrolyzer which generates the HHO fuel, is powered by the generator which it's driving, and there is water fed through a venturi tube to create water droplets, also entering the motor with the airstream. That is a very effective way of using a standby generator to create what's called free energy, which strictly speaking isn't free, except that you don't have to pay for anything. However, in this simple system from Roger, your normal vehicle fuel is used, so no HHO gas mix is needed, although of course you can add that too if you choose to do so, and yet you get an energy gain from just using a jar of water. A glass jar has the advantage of not being affected by the heat produced by the engine. This is a very simple unit, and it uses ordinary water, which is not exactly a hazardous substance. The effect of using it is far greater than would be imagined. On Roger's 4-cylinder Kia car, the miles per gallon rose from 320 miles per tank full of fuel to 380 miles per tank full of fuel around town and 420 miles on the open road. Those are gains of 18% and 31%, which is a very marked improvement. His 6-cylinder Tacoma shows an 8% increase around town and a 12% increase on the open road. The water is topped up every 1200 miles or so. Some engines are suited to the air stone, some are not. Smaller engines may work much better if a stainless steel screw is used instead of the air stone, and the screw is driven into the plastic tube where the incoming air is being drawn into the water container. Just to clarify the operation of the device, you have incoming air from outside the vehicle going through a plastic tube to a water stone, which turns the airflow into a very large number of very small bubbles, and it then passes out of the container and is connected to the low pressure air intake pipe between the air filter and the engine itself. The container has a plastic elbow connection in the lid through which the outside air is drawn into the container. The air flows down through a plastic tube to either an air stone from a pet shop or a loose bolt in the end of the plastic tube. The air stone has many small holes in it, and these break the incoming gas up into many streams of small bubbles. There is a second elbow in the lid, and the air, which is now very damp, is drawn out through it by the reduced pressure in the normal air intake of the engine. The lower pressure there is caused by the intake strokes of the engine, and the air going to the engine now comes from two sources: the normal path through the air filter and the new path through the bubbler. Most of the air flows through the air filter as normal, but there is now a small percentage which flows through the water, adding cold moisture to the airflow. Some people feel that this couldn't possibly make any difference, but experience has shown that the addition of the extra stream of damp air can, and usually does, have a beneficial effect, improving the miles per gallon provided by the engine and making the engine run a little cooler, and generally improving the operation of the engine. This is a very simple, low-tech device which does not cost much, so if you feel inclined, then try it out and see what effect it has on your vehicle. After all, if it does not provide a useful improvement, then you can easily remove it.